Can I ask everyone to go ahead and take your seats? This is a spirited group that's gathered here this morning. We welcome all of you. And today, as you know, we're here to discuss the implementation of maybe the most historic piece of legislation that Senator Capito and our colleagues here on this committee have ever worked on. And that is the implementation of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. We call it the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And specifically, we're going to look at the implementation. We want to look at the implementation through the eyes of our state and local partners who gathered here today. As I think you all know, our committee played a pivotal role in the development of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law last year. Two pieces of legislation that we unanimously reported out of this committee: the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Act and the Drinking Water and Wastewater Investment Infrastructure Act became the foundation on which this bipartisan infrastructure law was built. We're very proud of that. Bipartisan infrastructure law was a once-in-a-generation investment in our nation's infrastructure. The law provides more than $350 billion. My staff first wrote this, my statement. They wrote $350 million. And I said, no, I think that's a B. It's $1 billion for our nation's highway programs. And, it increased formula funding to the states by 34% and significantly increased funding for competitive grant programs for states and for local governments. In the 10 months since President Biden signed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Trust Infrastructure Law into law, the U.S. Department of Transportation has been hard at work standing up new programs and administering the historic amount of highway funding that Congress has provided through this measure. In March of this year, this committee held its first hearing on the implementation of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. During that hearing, we heard from our Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, about the department's work to promptly get formula funding out to the states. This is critical, as you know, so that the states, our states, can get to work on projects that will improve your highways, your bridges, and multimodal infrastructure. As a recovering governor, I also know that the hard work of carrying out our highway program is not just a federal responsibility. State and local agencies played critical roles in prioritizing and ultimately choosing the projects that are funded by your respective states, depending on your own unique needs and challenges. As recipients of federal highway funding, states are on the front lines of constructing and maintaining our national network of highways and bridges, improving safety and equity for all highway roadway users. To that end, I've been pleased to see the U.S. Department of Transportation continue to roll out new programs and provide funding guidance to help states and local governments navigate our new infrastructure law. This includes guidance for the promoting resilient operations for transformative and efficient and cost savings transportation. There's got to be a good acronym there, and it is PROTECT. Formula funding, which the committee created in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law under the historic $18 billion climate title. The Department of Transportation released guidance for this program back in July. It provides nearly $7.3 billion over 5 years to make highway infrastructure more resilient to the effects of climate change. The PROTECT program will be a game changer for states like ours, like mine, like Michelle's, and which are the lowest. So we are the lowest lying state, as my colleagues have heard me say repeatedly, lowest lying state in the country. Our state has highways like Route 1, which goes almost length for our state from up north to all the way down to Maryland, that are very much at increased risk of being washed over by a storm or by a flood. Thanks to the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, states like ours, Delaware, now have formula funding specifically dedicated to protecting our vulnerable coastal infrastructure. In addition to the critical role that states play, it's also important to recognize that counties, that cities, that towns also have unique transportation challenges, but also unique transportation opportunities. And that's why we also enhance the role of local governments in delivering federally funded projects to your communities in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. For example, we improved the ability of smaller communities to receive transportation alternative funding for bicycle and pedestrian projects. The law also makes state and local governments eligible recipients of several new discretionary grant programs, including the Reconnecting Communities Program and the Rural Surface Transportation Grant Program. These programs will help state and local governments meet the needs of their communities, whether they happen to be urban or they happen to be rural or somewhere in between, in order to better improve resiliency, improve equity, and safety. These are some of the top priorities we heard from stakeholders when developing this legislation. Given the large funding increase, the number of new surface transportation programs that were created, I believe that we need to hear the perspectives of those on the ground, those who have gathered here today. Doing so allows us to know what's working well and what might need some further attention. Our hearing today will allow us to hear from state and local leaders. It's an opportunity to ask how they're doing and what they're doing with the funding provided by Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Senator Capito and I meet almost on a weekly basis and talk about issues before us, priorities before us, and I appreciate very much her suggesting that we have this hearing. I fully agree that's timely and appropriate. But we're privileged to have a distinguished panel of state and local leaders with us this day. Joining us are Nicole Majeski, the Secretary of the Delaware Department of Transportation. I was saying to Nicole that sitting right out here last week was a fellow who used to hold your chair, Shailen Bhatt, who's been nominated, as you know, to run be the U.S. Highway Administrator. Thought he did a nice job, and we'll see if we can't move his nomination along. But we're also joining Nicole, our Mayor Regina Romero from the city of Tucson, Arizona. Senator Kelly, I think, had asked and encouraged us to invite you, so we're happy that you could join us. Jimmy Riston, the Secretary of West Virginia Department of Transportation. This is a home game. He and I were talking about our roots. Mine in Becklin and his not far from there. And Jim Tymon, the Executive Director of American Association of State Highways and Transportation Officials, affectionately known as AASHTO. Each of these witnesses will be able to provide a unique and diverse perspective, including perspectives from a coastal state, a rural mountain state, a city in the desert Southwest, and an organization representing state departments of transportation across the country. I want to thank our staffs for helping to pull together what I think is just an excellent panel. And I'm particularly pleased to be able to welcome Nicole Majeski, who leads the Delaware Department of Transportation. I welcome Secretary Majeski and all of our witnesses here, to each and every one of you. We're delighted to see you. And we look forward to hearing from each of you. Before we do, though, we're going to hear from our ranking member and my colleague and partner in this, Senator Capito, for her remarks. Senator Capito.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Carper, and I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today. I'm going to issue a statement. I'm going to make my statement, then I have to run to another committee really quick, so I'm not running out on you. I'll run back. But I wanted to combine my statements to an opening statement and also a especially warm welcome to Secretary Riston and a little bit about him. He's a dedicated public service, and he has served the state of West Virginia for over 25 years. Last year, he received a much-deserved appointment to serve as the Secretary of the West Virginia DOT. And because that doesn't keep him busy enough, he also serves as the Commissioner of the West Virginia Division of Highways. Secretary Riston began his career at the West Virginia DOT in the Bridge Department. You wonder why I'm always talking about bridges. He then moved to the Engineering Division and for the past 12 years served as the department's Chief Transportation Engineer and Special Program Manager. This wealth of experience has positioned him perfectly to lead the department. The IIJA has provided West Virginia the opportunity to make major improvements in our roadway and bridge systems. The work of West Virginia DOT has made it possible to move projects forward on Corridor H, Coalfields Expressway, Jefferson Road expansion in South Charleston, and I-64 St. Albans Nitro Bridge. The state has also recently received 2 RAISE grants for the Wheeling Streetscape and the Morgantown Greenbag Road Corridor project. I appreciate your leadership, Secretary Riston, on these and other projects and look forward to our continued partnership. With the Secretary today, we know that one person can't do it all. He has with him Nate Tawney, who is the Department of Transportation General Counsel, Carrie Hodges, who is the West Virginia head of West Virginia Legislative Affairs. Oh, I'm sorry, I said Carrie. Lori Lori Hodges, I'm sorry, Lori, been with the department for many years, and we've worked together, and also Melissa Decker from the governor's office. So thank you all for being here with us. And we did learn today, because we had a little meeting before, that this is the first West Virginia Secretary of Transportation to testify before our committee. So we're very happy to have that historic occasion. It's been a year since the president signed the IIJA into law. We promised the American people the IIJA would deliver results by improving and expanding our nation's core infrastructure, an investment that we all agreed was long overdue. This historic legislation proves that we can come together to develop legislation that tackles our nation's pressing challenges in a bipartisan manner. And I'm proud of what we did on this committee. The foundation was this committee's bipartisan projects, the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Act, and the Drinking Water and Wastewater and Infrastructure Act of 2021. Both of those, we had unanimous votes coming out of this committee. This committee now has the responsibility, I think, of ensuring proper implementation of the IIJA. The witnesses here today are direct recipients of IIJ funding, which means they're perfectly positioned to give us a status update. Timing of this conversation is particularly appropriate, given that just last week we had a hearing to consider the president's nominee to be administrator of the FHWA, Shalem Bat, which many of you know because he was a former DOT administrator in 2 states, actually. So I know the staff at the FHWA has been working hard to implement the IIJA, standing up new programs, getting funding out of the door, but it's taken a long time before we could get that nomination up to, I think, us, and I'm with you. I hope we move forward on that. I've seen some policies from FHWA that contradict the IIJA statutory text. Talked to Secretary Buttigieg about this just yesterday. I've been told that the agency is neglecting to implement certain provisions of the bill, mainly the project delivery sections. FHWA began to deviate from the law with the release of the December 16th FHWA memorandum to staff, policy on using the bipartisan infrastructure law resources to build a better America. This memorandum encourages residents of highway funding to flex that funding to transit investments, discourages states from moving forward with projects that add highway capacity, and imposes a one-size-fits-all by discouraging transferring program funds to where they're needed most, which was a flexibility that was intentionally built into the law, it's longstanding, to ensure that each state's unique needs are met. Our needs in North Dakota and West Virginia are much different than what you need in Arizona or California or other places. Following the memorandum, FWHA released programmatic guidance documents for the core highway formulaic programs that included the same policy directives represented in the memorandum. Beyond contradicting the law, these guidance documents have created confusion among states and the FHWA divisions offices and are leading to inconsistent implementation. The IIJA provided provisions to address climate change, as the chairman said, historically, a climate change dedication in the bill, and the resiliency of transportation infrastructure. And we did this in a bipartisan way. A greenhouse emissions performance measure was debated and ultimately left out of the bipartisan IIJA. The Biden administration decided the law didn't go far enough and proposed a rule to impose greenhouse gas emissions performance measures and associated targets on state departments of transportation and metropolitan planning organizations without any authority from this Congress. All these actions follow a common theme at FHWA, which is implementing partisan policy priorities they wished had been concluded in the IIJA, and doing so ahead of implementing many of the provisions that are actually in the legislation. The FHWA staff has done all of this without the accountability of having a Senate-confirmed administrator, which hopefully we're going to solve that. I had questions for Mr. Blatt on many issues last week. They are pressing for us to be able to conduct our oversight activities. With that in mind, we'll look for our witnesses to tell us what programs and policies of the IIJA are most beneficial in addressing the unique challenges in your state, community, and member states. What's going well regarding, we don't need to, it's a little bit easier to say everything that isn't going well. We need to hear the things that are going well, because that's just as important. I'm interested in how the construction landscape is impacting transportation projects. Supply chain obviously is a big issue. Material costs, staffing shortages, Buy America policies have also come up. The IIJA included unprecedented funding to address the needs of our nation's core infrastructure, our core transportation infrastructure. Proper implementation of the law is the only way to ensure that this funding will uphold the promises that were made to the American people with its passage. Thank you again for being here. This is importantly and timely, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having the.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for your statement. And for our next introduction, Senator Kelly is going to be introducing a special guest from Tucson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an important hearing on an incredibly important piece of legislation, which I know all of us worked very hard on, especially you and your ranking member, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. This law has already made an impact in so many communities across the country and in Arizona, including the community led by my friend and one of today's witnesses, Tucson Mayor Regina Romero. Mayor Romero became the first woman and first Latina to serve as mayor of Tucson when she was sworn in 2019. She has a history of breaking barriers, becoming the first member of her family to vote and the first in her family to graduate from college. Before being elected mayor, she served on the Tucson City Council for more than a decade, where she championed issues like workforce development and building the clean energy economy. As mayor, she's spearheaded the city's efforts to rebuild its infrastructure, now supported by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Mayor Romero has worked for years to address the worsening challenge of PFAS contamination in the city of Tucson's groundwater aquifer. We spoke about this yesterday in my office and about all the steps that she's taking to address this. And addressing this contamination is especially important because groundwater is Tucson's secondary supply of drinking water after water from the Colorado River. Our infrastructure law both makes historic investments in addressing PFAS contamination and making our Western water infrastructure more resilient to drought. Mayor Romero has also worked to improve Tucson's transportation infrastructure. Just over a month ago, Mayor Romero and I were joined in Tucson by Secretary Buttigieg to announce that the structurally deficient 22nd Street Bridge would be awarded a $25 million raise grant. Importantly, this project not only repairs a failing bridge that right now trucks and school buses and I think ambulances can't drive over, making those routes much longer for them, and kids have to take longer to get to school. But it also will help better connect several communities to the rest of Tucson. And Mayor Romero has led on regional issues as well, like expanding transit infrastructure throughout southern Arizona, deploying more low-emissions buses, and even identifying ways to better connect Tucson and Phoenix, the two largest cities in the state. And whether that's by widening I-10 or exploring the possibility of an Amtrak expansion between Phoenix and Tucson. Mayor Romero is a great example of how mayors, both Republicans and Democrats, are taking advantage of the once-in-a-generation opportunity here provided by our bipartisan infrastructure law to fix our aging infrastructure and build resilient communities for the future. So I'd like to welcome my mayor, Mayor Romero, to today's hearing. I'll be back a little bit later for my questions, and thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
You're quite welcome. We thank you for the welcome to your mayor. And let me just ask, before we start our statements and questioning, we have 1 million people who live in Delaware. I think I've met them all. What is the population of Tucson?
Tucson has 560,000 residents in the city proper and 1.1 million in the metropolitan area.
Got it, okay. And Jimmy, what do y'all have in West Virginia these days?
Our entire state has a population of 1.8 million, so all of your 500,000 people are welcome to the Mountain State.
All right, fair enough. We're delighted that our secretary from Delaware has joined us, Nicole Majeski. And my recollection, I'm trying to think, when did you become secretary a year ago? In January?
A year and a half ago.
Yeah. So how's it going?
It's going very well, sir.
Would you say this is the best job you've ever had?
It is the best job I've ever had.
Oh, good. How's the governor doing?
The governor is doing great.
Tell him we said hi. Before we turn to our other witnesses, I'm just going to ask you to lead us off, and we'll hear your statement and also hear from Jim Tymon. You pronounce your name Tymon, right?
Yes, sir.
There we go. And then we'll ask some questions. But Secretary Majeski, please proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Carper, Ranking Member Capito, and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify today. I'm Nicole Majeski, and I have the privilege of serving as the Secretary of Transportation in Delaware and representing our more than 2,500 dedicated employees statewide.
Are you joined by any members of your staff
I
today?
am joined by Sierra McLeod, our director.
Sierra, would you raise your hand, Mr. McLeod? Mr. McLeod used to be my driver. when I tell people I drove him. We had 600,000 miles on my Chrysler Town & Country minivan. When I sold it last year for $1, he put about 100,000 of those miles on it by himself. CR, nice to see you. Welcome.
Well, I'd like to thank you, sir, for this invitation and for your constant support of the important infrastructure work that we are doing in our home state. The Delaware Department of Transportation is committed to providing excellence in transportation for every trip, every mode, every dollar, and every one. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law is a needed investment of additional federal dollars to our transportation infrastructure. We are grateful to the Biden administration and to the members of Congress for this historic program that will ensure our roads and bridges are safe and well-maintained, our communities are better served and connected, and that we are making the necessary investments for the electrification of our infrastructure and resiliency due to climate change. The $1.6 billion in federal funding that Delaware is receiving through BIL, along with our committed state resources, will allow us to deliver the largest capital program to date. BIL funding is instrumental to the many initiatives in Delaware, and I'll be highlighting a few of those today. As the lowest-lying state, Delaware is seeing firsthand the effects of climate change and sea level rise. We are increasingly seeing roads in our coastal areas overtopped with water, not just during significant storm events, but due to tidal flooding on sunny days. We estimate that $1 billion worth of our existing infrastructure is vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. To address this issue, and as part of the state's climate action plan that Governor Carney announced last fall, we created the Resiliency and Sustainability Division within DELDOT to centralize our efforts. This division is focusing on incorporating resiliency and sustainability measures in the construction and maintenance of our projects and finding ways to protect our existing infrastructure. The division is also leading our efforts on the electrification of our infrastructure and fleet, incorporating the use of alternative energy, and minimizing the impacts on our environment caused by the transportation system. The newly created formula funding through Protect, carbon reduction, and EV infrastructure will allow us to move forward with these critical projects. Additionally, Delaware is committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions through our transit fleet. Delaware has benefited from federal discretionary grants supporting low or no-emission buses. By the end of this year, 10% of our fixed-route fleet will be all electric. Our latest low-no grant through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law will allow us to purchase 2 hydrogen buses and install our first hydrogen fueling station. Federal discretionary grants have made these investments in alternative energy possible. Our efforts to improve our transportation system extend beyond a focus on infrastructure alone. DELDOT is committed to ensuring that transportation is equitable and accessible for everyone. We have recently received 2 federal grants for the Route 9 corridor near our largest urban area to assist us in planning transportation and transit improvements within the census-defined low-income area. The Areas of Persistent Poverty grant and the RAISE grant will allow us to do extensive community outreach, plan transit and multimodal connections, and look at opportunities to improve safety and public transit throughout this corridor. Lastly, I would be remiss if I did not talk about safety. As a DOT, safety is our top priority. The safety of the traveling public, regardless of the mode that they're using, and the safety of our workforce that is out on our roads every single day. Last year was the deadliest year on our roadways in 15 years, with 139 fatalities. And unfortunately, as of this morning, we have 109 fatalities, which is 20% higher than where we were last year at this time. We continue to work with our partners in law enforcement and the Office of Highway Safety to implement the recommendations of our state's Strategic Highway Safety Plan. And over the next 6 years, we will invest hundreds of millions of dollars in projects across our state to improve safety for all modes, including our most vulnerable users, pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorcyclists. While the Safe Streets and Roads for All program is not available for state DOTs, we are pleased to be supporting the City of Wilmington on their application. Wilmington is the largest urban area in Delaware and has a high concentration of walking and bicycling activities while serving as the center of Delaware's bus and rail networks. Delaware is unique in that the state owns and maintains 90% of the roads and bridges. So our partnerships with our 3 counties and 57 towns and municipalities is critical to improving safety for all of our users. In closing, under Governor Carney's leadership, we are committed to improving safety, reducing our emission levels, and developing a multimodal transportation system that is equitable. The components of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law will allow us to achieve these goals. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak before the committee today.
Great. Thanks very much, Madam Secretary, and welcome again. Now we're going to hear from the mayor. It's a town with roughly 1 million people, and we're happy to hear from you. Welcome. Very nice to meet you.
Thank you
Please
so much,
proceed.
Mr. Chairman. Good morning, buenos dias, Chairman Carper.
Bienvenido.
Buenos dias, Chairman Carper, Ranking Member Capito, and members of this committee. Thank you for inviting me to participate in today's hearing. I will share my views on the transformative impact the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law is having in Tucson and cities across the nation. Senator Kelly, thank you so much. I appreciate your gracious introduction and the way you fight for Tucson. Tucson, the 33rd largest city in the United States, is home to 560,000 residents and nearly 1.1 million people in the greater metro area. Our lands have been stewarded by the Tohono O'odham and Pascua Yaqui people since time immemorial. Through BIL funding, Tucson is building infrastructure and investments that heal historic wounds, reconnect communities, and address the challenges that result from being on the front lines of climate change. My vision for Tucson's future is an equitable, climate-resilient desert city that sustains itself through conservation, investment, and good policy. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law this committee so skillfully negotiated is crucial to meeting our goals. The nation benefits when Congress sends money directly to cities. We know how to get it done. Just last month, Senator Kelly and I joined Transportation Secretary Buttigieg in Tucson, where he announced a $25 million raise grant for Tucson's 22nd Street Bridge. Using this grant, local and regional funds, a structurally deficient bridge will be replaced. We will improve the quality of life for Tucsonans who have lived with safety risks, heavy trucks in their neighborhoods, few options for non-motorized travel, and separation from other neighborhoods. We will improve safety around railroad infrastructure, reduce crashes and emergency response times, and mitigate other safety issues. We will reduce greenhouse gas emissions and the vehicle miles traveled, addressing climate resiliency. And we will improve the ability of Union Pacific Railroad to move goods more efficiently, helping to address global supply challenges. Thank you to the U.S. Department of Transportation for selecting this project. There are tremendous opportunities available in the BIL, including resources for EV infrastructure, extending environmental remediation and clean energy investments, and a streetcar bus rapid transit expansion. We will apply for these funds and appreciate Congress for increasing the transit funding. However, today I must focus on the greatest challenges to our water security: PFAS contamination and the persistent effects of drought that threaten our Colorado River supply. It is important to understand the history and specifics of groundwater contamination in Tucson to make clear how critical BIL-funded projects are to securing our water supply, supporting our economy, and protecting public health. Tucson's diverse water supply portfolio includes the Colorado River, which is experiencing unprecedented drought. This makes us increasingly reliant on our groundwater supply that is being polluted by PFAS, a forever chemical. In addition to PFAS, residents of Tucson's South Side have been historically impacted by TCE and DX, believed to contribute to health concerns including cancer and heart disease. We are spending $1 million a year to treat PFAS and have already spent almost $50 million so far to deal with this impact from our own ratepayers who did not cause this issue. Tucson has lost over 10% of our water supply to PFAS contamination, and now parts of our system rely solely on their backup supply. There is no redundancy. We must protect our water. Tucson is a sustainable desert city because we use reclaimed water for non-potable uses. But that water also is affected by PFAS, which in our closed basin system puts the entire water system at risk. We need to act now. The funding available in the BIL is critical to solving this need. We need DOD to move fast and for EPA to push for the data and assistance we need. Tucson is ready to be the sustainable, thriving desert city of the future. Thank you for allowing me to speak about how BIL funding is making a difference to us, and I welcome any questions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mayor Romero, thanks so much for your testimony, for your leadership. Delighted that you are here. And now we're going to turn to Secretary Riston, who, Mr. Secretary, you're recognized to proceed. And we'll ask Mr. Tymon to do the same thing, and then we'll ask some questions. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member Capito, I am delighted to be visiting the shining city on the hill today to talk to you about West Virginia's perspective. In particular, I do want to focus on exactly what Senator Capito said. I want to focus on what is working. I would be remiss if I didn't report on some of the difficulties that we're having and the challenges that we need to overcome. So I'm going to do a little bit of that too. I can tell you that I am particularly grateful for this committee. This committee has done a Herculean task. They produced the most impactful transportation law that this country's ever seen, I believe. This is an opportunity to exceed the great achievement of building the interstates across the country in the last century. So now the real work has to happen, and we have to move fast. We have to move together. We have to form partnerships to get this done, get it done efficiently, and take advantage of this great opportunity before us. We have to, we as transportation officials have to communicate, work together, and really pull the rope in the same direction. We have to follow the law. We have to understand the guidelines. We have to move within those guidelines to achieve a goal. Not just to go through an exercise or a bureaucratic process, but to move the ball toward a predictable result that we all want to take care of. The mission of the IIJA is quite clear. We want to deliver a safe, efficient transportation system while addressing resiliency, equity, and environmental concerns. These things we can do. The Department of Transportation officials across the country have been doing these very things and working toward these things for years and years without the resources to do them and to actually achieve the results. This is our opportunity to do so. West Virginia has the 6th largest highway system in the country. Little West Virginia, the 6th largest highway system. Us, like our good friends in Delaware, we take care of the majority of these roads. Nearly 94% of all the roads the state is responsible for. We have over 7,100 bridges in West Virginia. Our bridges are safe. I need to make sure that everyone understands that. The modern inspection program was born right there in West Virginia, much like you were, Senator Carper.
So it's young.
The modern bridge inspection program rose out of the ashes of tragedy in Point Pleasant in 1967. And
I remember that well.
Since then, there is no transportation person in the country that doesn't know that story, and no bridge engineer that doesn't understand the weight of their responsibility in saying that our bridges are safe. But they need attention, they need care, and we have to move forward along that and take great opportunity with this. The IIJA, I must admit, my first read through the bill just before it passed, I was a little skeptical of the bridge program. The bridge program works exceptionally well in West Virginia. The minimum of 15% for the off-system bridges, that worried me a little bit until I went to my bridge management system and had my great experts to run this for me and tell me 15.2% of the bridges in West Virginia are the off-system. So that 15% minimum, it's right there. We're going to be able to operate within the guidelines of this bridge program and take care of all the bridges that are rated poor that are off-system. We think we can do them all in this time frame.
Well, that's great. That's great news.
I think this is As Shelley told you, I'm a bridge engineer at heart, but I've had to broaden my view a little bit when taking this position. So the bridge program works well with us. The rule provisions are tailored specifically for the great state of West Virginia, and we're going to take advantage of each and every one of those. We do have much concerns about some of the discretionary programs. The formula programs work well. They're going to work well across the country. I can firmly and confidently predict today, a year from now, we will be talking about great successes with the formula portions of this law. I will just as confidently predict absolute and nearly abstract failure on the discretionary side. We have got to do better with our federal partners in these agencies. We need consistent direction, we need consistent guidelines, and we have to be able to understand them. And the FHWA divisions need to be able to bring forth guidance in these areas that are consistent state to state, so that when we meet at an AASHTO conference, we all have the same information and the same guidance, and we know what we can plan and work together. I understand I'm working just a little long. I do have to mention the bumblebees on my Great Quarter H project. This is a classic case of inconsistency in a federal agency. We have worked diligently for years and years on Quarter H. This is why it's taking decades to finish this job. It's exactly what's happening today. We need consistent guidance. We need to do the front end work on the front end, take care of these issues. A capture of 2 bumblebees 200 feet off of my studied corridor should not add years and decades to a project. It just cannot happen. We're going to fail abstractly if we don't make sure that we're all on the same page, get the same guidelines together, and communicate honestly and openly. Give us direction, work with us. We depend on these federal agencies. We look at them not only as partners, but advocates for the state. And I think they've lost their way. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you. And to your last point, and Senator Capito and I, our colleagues were well pleased with the testimony of our witness, the nominee to be the Federal Highway Administrator, Shaylin Bott. And to the extent that we can get him confirmed and in place, it's taken too long to have you nominate him, but to the extent that we can get him confirmed sooner rather than later, having been not just Secretary of DelDOT in our state, but also Secretary of Colorado. He worked in the state of Kentucky and at USDOT, so I think he can be very helpful in some of this stuff. All right, he's pretty good at common sense. All right, I'm tempted to say best for last, but Jim, you're welcome. Jim Tymon, please, thanks for joining us today, and please proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Carper, Ranking Member Capito, and members of the committee. I do want to thank you for the opportunity to appear today to discuss implementation of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. My name is Jim Tymon, and I serve as the Executive Director of the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, and it's my honor to testify on behalf of our members, the State Departments of Transportation for all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. First, let me start by saying that AASHTO applauds this committee for your leadership in the development and enactment of IIJA. We know that your work on earlier bills like ATIA laid the foundation for IIJA. The IIJA lines up extremely well with AASHTO's core policy principles adopted by our Board of Directors in 2019. It's a 5-year bill. It prioritizes formula funding to state DOTs, and it provides states the flexibility to work with their local partners to choose the projects that meet the needs of their constituents. It recognizes that the transportation needs in Delaware are different than the needs in West Virginia, as well as in Arizona, and the program provides the flexibility for it to be applicable in all of those areas. We know that this legislation was the culmination of bipartisan negotiations in this committee, and as such, AASHTO members have been working with USDOT to encourage them to implement IIJA in a manner that is consistent with the letter of the law and the negotiated balance of policy priorities that were necessary to get this bill to the President's desk. This morning, I would like to address the following topics: highway safety, discretionary grant programs, Buy America, and the impact of inflation on delivering projects. Last year, nearly 43,000 people died in traffic crashes nationwide. This is unacceptable, and we all must do better to address this crisis. Thanks to this committee's leadership, the IIJA increased funding and flexibility for the Highway Safety Improvement Program, which allows states to expand their efforts to implement projects and programs that improve highway safety. But it's also important to note that states utilize funding from nearly every federal highway category to make safety improvements. So the overall increase in funding in IIJA will also provide state DOTs with additional resources to help reverse this trend and make progress towards our ultimate goal of zero roadway fatalities. Another significant aspect of IIJA is the historic increase in funding for discretionary grants. We believe the efficient and effective delivery of the IIJA's discretionary programs is critical to achieving some of Congress's most important priorities. Many of these programs are open to local entities that may struggle with the complex set of rules that go along with receiving federal highway funding. We encourage USDOT to simplify the requirements for all of their programs and eliminate as much bureaucratic red tape as possible. This will enable all grantees to be more successful, whether they are cities, counties, or state DOTs. Before I close, I'd like to spend a few minutes discussing some of the challenges that we're already seeing with the implementation of IIJA. AASHTO and the state DOTs strongly support the intent behind the inclusion of the new Buy America requirements in IIJA. The expansion of America's manufacturing capacity and the creation of new domestic jobs will encourage economic growth and make us a stronger nation. At the same time, we firmly believe it is in the public interest to implement these new requirements in a way that allows for the timely and successful delivery of critical infrastructure projects. The bottom line is there are some of these materials and products that are used in transportation projects underway right now that are not made in the U.S. So transportation agencies need additional time to integrate these new requirements into their program and project delivery processes, and our private sector partners need additional time to revamp their business plans to be able to produce these products and materials domestically. Without that additional time, these projects may be delayed and some may even be canceled. Finally, state DOTs continue to struggle with the unprecedented impacts of inflation. Huge increases in the cost of construction materials and severe supply chain disruptions are driving up the cost of projects and have the potential to wipe out the entire funding increase provided to state DOTs through IIJA. This will have negative effects throughout the industry, but the impacts of this will be especially devastating to small and disadvantaged business enterprises that lack the resources to absorb these unexpected cost increases. This is one of the reasons that AASHTO and 27 other national organizations support S. 3011, co-sponsored by Senators Padilla and Cornyn. This bill would clarify that states and localities can use ARPA funds for transportation projects and to cover those incremental cost increases that we're seeing due to inflation. And we really feel strongly that Congress should send that bill to the President's desk before the end of the calendar year. So in summary, AASHTO and its members are thrilled for the chance to implement this historic piece of legislation and to deliver public benefits to every corner of the country. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for that testimony. I'm going to start off with Secretary Majeski. You mentioned the sad increase in deaths on our roads and highways and bridges in Delaware, and for our other colleagues, I-95 is being reconstructed right through Wilmington, Delaware. It's an incredible project. The major highway in our country literally goes right through Wilmington, Delaware, and we've seen the loss of life there because of vehicles, going too fast and all. Despite the great efforts, Herculean efforts of the Secretary and her team to address that. I was asked today on the train by several passengers who said, "Thank God we have the train because it enables us to move expeditiously up and down the corridor." I told people said, "When will I-95 reconstruction be done?" I said, "I think by the end of this year." Was that good guidance or not?
That is correct, sir. We hope to have all the major work completed by the end of this year. There will still be, as we call, punch list items that will continue into next year, but the major impacts to the roadway will hopefully be completed by the end of this year.
All right, thanks. Thanks for all the work that's gone on there and for your leadership as well. I think it was in March of this year, our governor, John Carney, announced that Delaware was going to join 13 other states in adopting California's zero-emission vehicle regulations, which will make it easier, we believe, for Delaware drivers to be able to purchase electric vehicles and save households anywhere from $500 to $1,000 a year on fuel costs. My question is, how is DelDOT supporting those commitments, and how will the funding from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law for transportation electrification align to support those efforts?
Yes, thank you. So we are working with our partner agency, DENREC, on developing our strategic plan on EV deployment throughout the state. Our NEVI plan was recently approved, so we're excited to be able to get started on phase 1 of that, which will focus on our alternative fuel corridors. And then the next phase will work on filling the gaps within our transportation system to make sure that we are providing EV charging to not just on the main highways, but throughout the state, and so that communities and neighborhoods have access to the EV charging as well. So we're one of the partners working, like I said, with DENREC, but also with the electric providers to be able to make sure that we have the utility access and coordination to be able to deploy this electrification throughout the state.
All right, thank you. Madam Secretary, would you share with our committee the Delaware Department of Transportation's experience in working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to ensure that transportation projects do not further imperil endangered species? And how does proactive collaboration and conservation with the Fish and Wildlife Service help avoid project delays?
It is very critical that we have a good working relationship with the agency. We try to work collaboratively with all of our federal agencies, especially, as my colleague mentioned, whenever an endangered species or any type of issue might come up. We want to be good stewards of the environment, and we want to protect our natural resources. Having that partnership with them is critical, especially if there is some sort of endangered species or there are limitations to when construction can occur. We have to be able to plan our projects accordingly so that we know when, in fact, construction can happen, so that we're not disturbing certain areas and species throughout the state. So that partnership is critical. So far, so good, I will say. But there is a lot of planning and coordination. We have a 6-year capital plan that we develop, and so we are working in partnership with them to identify any potential conflicts that we may have, and so we can adjust our construction timing accordingly.
Okay, thank you. A question, if I could, for Mayor Romero. Thanks again for your testimony on, especially on transportation equity and climate-related issues, and your work to revitalize communities while also reducing transportation emissions. I believe that the funding from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, especially when paired with the new funding made available in the Inflation Reduction Act, will make it possible for cities to achieve their ambitious climate goals and make long-lasting and transformative changes. Question: how are you partnering with community-based organizations to ensure that they are aware of and have the technical capacity to access the opportunities made available in these two laws? And what could federal agencies do to help facilitate local capacity building, and enable city progress on climate and equity goals?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The city of Tucson has a long history of having extensive community engagement actions in our city. For example, right now we're putting together a climate action plan and making sure that we're getting to each and every community and in different forms. So I believe that with the newer funds in both the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and in the Inflation Reduction Act, we will have to receive technical assistance, maybe even for cities. City of Tucson has a super competent team in our Department of Transportation and Mobility and other departments, but technical assistance for us to be able to partner with other organizations in our city to be able to navigate the new programs that will hopefully exist for EV infrastructure and for electrification purposes, as well as being able to prepare and collaborate with other jurisdictions like the state and Pima County and the city of Tucson, and partnering together to navigate the new programs that will exist for us to be able to electrify and expand different modes of transportation in our cities. So capacity building, we were just at the Department of Energy yesterday. I think that another area to help us navigate is the partnerships with community colleges and universities as we create the green jobs of the future with the Inflation Reduction Act especially, because we're moving from, for example, in Pima County, the city of Tucson, we have Pima College training automotive techs with the new technology of EV vehicles. So I think that would be a best practice to be able to offer technical assistance and to move fast so that the cities can tap into the funds, receive the grants, and put the projects to work.
Good. What you're doing there was actually something that we reflected in what we're doing in Southern Delaware and Georgetown with Del Tech in terms of training auto techs and making sure not only they can fix diesel and gasoline-powered vehicles, but also electric vehicles. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Senator Capito. I want to telegraph my next pitch. When we come back, if we have time for another question or two. The question I'm going to ask all of you is, what kind of advice, if you could give some advice to Secretary Buttigieg, what kind of advice would you be giving to him at this point in time? All right, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Senator Capito.
Yes, thank you all for your opening statements. And Secretary Riston, I wanted to ask about when we were negotiating the surface transportation reauthorization in this committee, we talked a lot about greenhouse gas performance measures, and we decided not to give the FHWA that authority. But they have now, FHWA has released a proposed rulemaking to establish a greenhouse gas emissions performance measure requiring states to set declining targets. So for our state, I guess, what is your reaction to that? Have you seen that? And then what kind of measures, since we have a diffuse population, obviously our emissions are going to be a lot less, and so to improve those is going to be more difficult for us. That's the way I see it. How do you see this?
Here we go again. The law's clear. That provision's not in it. Transportation is not opposed to working toward reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. Of course we're not. We're going to do anything and everything we can, which is exactly why the flexibility that's ingrained in the formula programs are so important. To be able to flex just the carbon reduction program when the rules told us clearly that we could flex up to 50% of that bucket to a more flexible category. And we did in West Virginia. The FHWA's division offices they run the gamut with guidance on that across the country with the 52 DOTs. Some states were told they could, some states were told they couldn't. Ours was approved for 3 months while everyone else was still hearing that it couldn't be done. The greenhouse gases, the DOTs are absolutely, we're not opposed to this, but we need the flexibility to do things that'll get a result. By moving that money into a different bucket, you gave me the flexibility to take a holistic approach, to look at the overall environmental concerns and put together comprehensive plans to address them. Yes, we're going to have to use a little innovation. We're going to have to use some technology to deliver these things, absolutely. But transportation is not the worst offender in the world with greenhouse gases, and we can take care of a portion of this. Transportation is not the solution to zero greenhouse gases. It's just not true, and it's never going to be true. We can work on this. We need flexibility to do it. A firm performance measure? Absolutely not. The minute you give me a performance measure, you're telling me up front you're going to set a bar. in many cases arbitrarily, and I'm going to have to move that needle over time, or I'm going to get a penalty somewhere.
Right, right. So it's consistency. I mean, I think that's what we're hearing. So, Mr. Tymon, what are you hearing since you're here from all different? I think the consistency, actually, we emphasized this last week with the nominee, to say that one state says yes, one state says no on exactly the same types of provisions or requirements. What are you hearing at the sort of in a more general sense on this issue?
On the greenhouse gas?
Greenhouse gas or the inconsistency of the district directors?
Well, I would say just for maybe first on the greenhouse gas emissions, you know, the rulemaking is currently pending. We're putting together our comments. We have states probably all over the map on this. We have several states that will support it and a lot of states that will be opposed to it. We as an organization were opposed to it during the Obama administration when they came out with this provision. Mainly because, again, it wasn't spelled out in the law that this is something that they should do. And with this one, I think we clearly have concerns about, as Secretary Riston mentioned, the declining targets, I think, is a problem. That's an approach that's not used in any of the other performance measures that we have. And then, again, the ability for state DOTs to be able to influence this specifically. I agree with Secretary Riston. Every state in the country wants to do everything they can to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but state DOTs are probably limited in how they can impact this reduction specifically. Overall, I do think that it is a concern that we do seem to get different guidance from state to state on different issues. I think this example on the transferability of certain funds from different programs really came to light this summer. Several states had asked their division offices for the ability to transfer funds. Some were told yes, some were told no. Some were told yes, but then were sent a stern letter saying that they shouldn't do it. So that is a concern for us. We've communicated that with FHWA and USDOT. They're aware that that's a concern.
Okay, good. Thank you. On the guidance, I only have a little bit of time left, but on the guidance that was put out by the FHWA in terms of the memorandum that really discourages new construction. You want to go to maintenance, you want to go to transit, you want to go to bike paths and other things of that nature. How does that impact? Is that impacting you, Secretary Riston? Or, I mean, are you actually seeing it impacting your ability to get approval for certain projects?
Well, it certainly is. I have many of these projects with the preliminary designs done, particularly in bridges. If I can't, if I need to add a sidewalk arbitrarily to a bridge, whether I need it or not, then I have to go back to the design and literally redesign the steel that holds that bridge up. It has to be resized. Conversely, going the other way, if I can't add capacity to my interstates, well, what am I doing to the next generation if I spend tremendous resources on a resurfacing job on I-79 in West Virginia and don't take care of the added capacity I know I'm going to need in 12 or 15 years? It makes planning impossible.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Senator Capito. Senator Whitehouse has joined us, and we're happy that he's here. Sheldon, please go right ahead.
Thanks. Let me first ask a question of Mayor Romero. I visited your sister city, Phoenix, not long ago, and was told by the emergency management city director that they were having to redo the staffing for all of their first responders to deal with the problem of operating in extreme heat environments, that you needed to have more people available so you could rotate somebody through a fire or a crash site or whatever it was much more rapidly. In addition to the additional personnel required for that, they also had to have cooling crews ready to deploy when people were becoming overheated and needed overheating first aid. Are you seeing that in your city as well?
Excellent question, Senator. Thank you. Climate change in Arizona is not, it's not as tangible as we see in other places like hurricanes and flooding. But what climate change is doing to our state is that we are living we're in the 22nd year of a drought. We are concerned about our water supply through the Colorado River, and we are experiencing more days, 100+ degree weather throughout the state. in Tucson, the way we are addressing climate change is through acting. We're putting together a climate action plan, working with the community to put it together. But we also need federal funds to be able to support the plans that we have as cities in order to protect our residents from climate change. We are seeing 100 plus 100-degree days more and more throughout Arizona. We are experiencing wildfires that are increasingly coming closer to our urban cores. We are seeing more asthma and especially seniors dying from heat-related illnesses. And our workers, I would say our first responders, our construction workers, people that have to work outside are at greater risks of heat exhaustion in our state. So,
particularly when they have to wear protective gear to accomplish their mission successfully.
They do, or have less hours of work.
Yeah.
We would have to change the way we deliver services
Well,
as
thank
cities,
you.
and
Let
that's very
me stop you there
expensive.
so that I can ask Secretary Majeski a question. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
On the subject of planning, as the mayor mentioned, Rhode Island, like Delaware, is a coastal state, and we are facing basically having to redraw our coastline with current sea level rise projections. You mentioned $1 billion in infrastructure just in Delaware alone at risk. Could you let me know how much of that you think is related to sea level rise risk? And if you could also comment on the need for planning in local communities who don't necessarily have the skill set to plan ahead, the tax-based problems they're required to confront when they do that planning and have to concede that things are going to be quite different, and the difference between wreck and repair versus plan and protect strategies and the additional expense that creates up front for our coastal communities.
Yeah. No, we are seeing the direct impacts of sea level rise and climate change. It is real in our state. We have about 250 miles of roadway that is overtopped with water pretty much year-round on sunny days, and a lot of that is due to the tidal flooding that we're seeing. So it's not just those strong storm effects, it is everyday flooding that we're seeing on sunny days. So we are kind of doing a two-prong approach here. We have now, with the federal funding, we're able to kind of do studying. We just launched the SR1 Coastal Resiliency Study actually last night, where we're looking at the entire Route 1 corridor from the beaches to the Maryland line. And because that stretch of roadway not only has the ocean, but it has the bay. So it is very vulnerable. And so we're looking at long-range planning, what we can do there. We're also partnering with the local universities on different material types and different things that we can be doing. We have a lot of our local small communities that are impacted by this flooding as well. And so that planning and coordination with these local communities. We have a road in Bowers Beach, South Bowers. There are 30 homes. They have one way in and one way out, and it is overtopped with water almost every single day. So we're going to be using some experimental pavement, some pervious pavement, so that we can see if that works, so we can help this community. So all of those things, it's going to take a lot of efforts for us. We're partnering, as I mentioned, with the universities on doing roadway flooding sensors so that we can have better communication with our first responders and our school districts as well. So lots of planning coordination, trying different material, trying to be innovative to protect the existing roadway that we have. But as we're planning these future projects, taking sea level rise into account as to what the road design is, what elevation should it be, and then protecting and working with those local communities is critical.
Thank you very much. If I could just mention one other thing, it's not a question, but we just got an $82 million grant for the bridge that connects Aquidneck Island with the mainland through Jamestown. It's called the Pell Bridge, after our former colleague, Senator Claiborne Pell. And with climate change and with changes in humidity and temperature, there is more intrusion of moisture into the cabling and structure of the bridge. So both that bridge and the Mount Hope Bridge between Aquidneck Island Portsmouth and Bristol, we're having to put in very expensive repairs to protect those bridges, to dehumidify the inside of the bridge. That was not something we had to think about a few years ago. So it's beyond just coastal flooding. Even things that look like really strong, fixed, stable, iconic pieces of infrastructure are affected. And thank goodness we got the biggest grant to Rhode Island transportation in Rhode Island history to help with that problem. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for all those points, Sheldon. Next is Senator Kramer. Senator Kramer, welcome. Thanks for coming early and staying late. Thank you.
Thank you. I wouldn't miss this show for anything. We have 4 really good witnesses, and
should we charge admission? What do you think? Maybe next time.
Well, I wouldn't go
next
too
time.
far.
Right.
Yeah, maybe next time. But I have to say, listening particularly to the 3 local and state officials, your stories and your reflections, your experiences reflect the diversity of our great country. And I think service testimony, each together and certainly all together, each individually and all together, as to why flexibility is so darn important. I mean, when I hear about drought in Arizona and flooding in the Northeast, and we hear from Sheldon and Senator Carper and our friends from the coast about your situation a lot. Obviously, the mountains. I mean, we have a diverse country. Our geology is different. Our hydrology is different. Our demography is different. We're all different. And this just speaks volumes to the importance of federalism and states having more control. So all of that said, a couple of things. I was tempted, frankly, to give all 5 of my minutes to Secretary Riston because I want to hear the whole bumblebee story. But I have a pretty good sense of what it's about. I have a pretty good sense of what it's about. And it, too, speaks to the importance of getting God's human creatures higher up the food chain, if you will, of importance at the bureaucracy. But you said something interesting, Mr. Riston, that I want to explore a little bit. In referencing the lack of a specific greenhouse gas rule, you said that the law is clear, it's not in there, or something to that effect. The problem with the bureaucracy is what they've figured out is they most of the time they do what we require them to, but not even that all the time. But they almost never pay attention until we tell them what they're prohibited from doing. Do you know what I mean? So the lack of a prohibition to them is license to do whatever they want. And that's what you're experiencing in a lot of these things. In fact, Mr. Tymon, we're seeing lots, I've noticed, out of transportation, out of DOT, lots of Federal Register, notices, right? There's an uptick in all of that. At a time when, I love what you said, Madam Mayor, when you said, talking about all your concerns, you said, and do it fast. Fast isn't in the bureaucratic mindset. So I want to go to something we haven't talked about that is law, that was in the law specifically, and that is the one agency decision rule. And the reason for one agency decision and why I think it works so well, and I spent 10 years as a regulator in North Dakota. One agency decision is not to cut corners. It's not designed to diminish the integrity of oversight or environmental protection. In fact, not at all. I think you can do it much, much better, much, much faster, with more efficiency and integrity, with one agency decision-making, because if you do things, rather than doing them chronologically, if you do them chronologically rather than, chronologically rather than concurrently, you're going to add time. But if you do it concurrently, you're going to add synergy, not just efficiency, but synergy. And that's what makes sense to me. But the bureaucracy likes chronological because it serves their interests best. That way, every agency can take as long as they want to do a simple thing, and then pass it to another agency, take as long as they want to do a simple thing. And we're living at a time when we have workforce shortages. It's getting harder to attract people to public service, just as it is to the private sector. And I think the one agency decision rule is not being utilized, and I think could be the answer to a lot of your challenges. And I'd be interested, starting with you, Mr. Tymon, from the association standpoint. Again, you represent a lot of diversity, and we see great examples of it sitting right next to you. Couldn't the one agency decision become part of the solution?
Well, thank you for that question, Senator. I do think that every state DOT in the country supports finding ways to expedite the approval of projects and doing it in a responsible way where we're not harming the environment. I do think that the Federal One decision provisions, do carve out a path for there to be a more efficient decision-making process. I mean, we've been advocating for 10, 15 years for a more concurrent review process as opposed to consecutive. I think this provides a good foundation for us to move forward in that direction.
Okay, real quickly then, on the issue of, because you talked about the grants, the discretionary grants, we've heard about that, the importance of the formula. Again, can we simplify even the discretionary grant programs by just applying the basics of the form? Because again, they're coming up with more ways to make it harder rather than facilitating it, in my view.
Well, one thing that the administration did do for several of the discretionary grants is they came up with a common application, and I have to give them a lot of credit for that because I think that did help for people that were potential grantees. They were able to just go to one application, but it wasn't for every discretionary grant that they had out there. I think that is going to be a challenge for this administration moving forward. Given the size of the discretionary grants and the number of them, how can they do that in an efficient manner to get those, to process those applications and get the dollars out on the street? I think that's going to be very tough over the next 4.5 years.
All of the directors are nodding their heads. Yeah. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. We've been joined by Senator Padilla from California. Senator Padilla, welcome. Good to see you. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Right on time, no less. Colleagues, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law created the PROTECT program to fund projects that improve the resiliency of our surface transportation infrastructure. I was proud to author language that added wildfires to the list of natural disasters relevant to resiliency improvement grants under the PROTECT program. Made vegetation management practices and transportation rights-of-way eligible for grant funding, and prioritizes resiliency improvement grants for addressing the vulnerabilities of surface transportation assets with a high risk of failure due to the impacts of wildfires. Clearly something that's increasingly common in California, as well as in your state, Mayor Romero. So my question is to you. As the Tucson region faces continued wildfire threats, why are the resources that the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law provides essential to improving the resiliency of our surface transportation infrastructure from wildfires and other natural disasters and climate vulnerabilities?
Thank you, Senator Padilla. And thank you for adding wildfires to the list of natural disasters in the PROTECT program. The city of Tucson benefits from having two incredible national parks on both the east side of our city and the west boundary of our city, and we have beautiful mountain ranges surrounding our city. We have seen wildfires in our mountain ranges, and they come dangerously close to homes, to residents in our city. At the same time, we must address wildland-urban interface issues, including risks of fires, floods, and mudslides, and their potential impacts on both private property and public infrastructure. This is why the city of Tucson supports the inclusion of the PROTECT program in the BIL. It will help ensure that our infrastructure can stand up to such events to protect life, health, and property. Specifically in Tucson, we're a center for logistics in our region. We're 60 miles from the Mexican border. We have rail, we have air, we have interstate that connects our entire state from Tucson. Commercial activity and supply chain shipments move through Tucson every hour, and therefore infrastructure failures in Tucson due to climate change can negatively impact national economic and security interests. So the cost of these failures can be significant. So we need to make sure that we're putting that resiliency on our infrastructure so that we don't have to pay billions of dollars to repair. We need to be able to protect beforehand.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you highlighting the sort of supply chain impacts, not just local geography, but once you're impacting supply chain and logistics of goods movement in addition to people's movement, then we're all feeling it indirectly. My next question is in the area of flexibility in delivering emergency relief projects. Under current regulations, the Federal Highway Administration is allowed to begin clawing back emergency relief funding if projects do not initiate construction by the end of the second fiscal year following the year in which the disaster occurred. Now, while states can apply for extensions provided in one-year increments for delays caused by the need for extensive environmental evaluation, litigation, or complex right-of-way acquisition, the Federal Highway Administration has previously denied such requests for a number of projects to repair disaster damage. To help ensure communities that are impacted by natural disasters have adequate time to utilize federal funds to repair their transportation infrastructure, I led a bipartisan letter earlier this year urging DOT to update emergency relief program regulations to extend the construction start deadline by 2 years. Question is actually for Mr. Tymon. Why is this proposed update important to ensuring state departments of transportation have practical requirements and a reasonable period of time to carry out their significant and often complex projects to repair transportation assets after a disaster?
Well, thank you for that question, Senator. We are hearing from several states, and we've seen this over the last 5 to 8 years, that several states are getting into this situation where the post-disaster recovery is such a complex effort that they need additional time beyond those 2 years to be able to plan and permit the project in a way that makes them for the most sense for that specific situation. So we certainly support your efforts to extend that timeline to 4 years. We think that that's the best approach. This 2-year approach may have worked well 20, 30 years ago, but given the changing nature of how complex these recovery projects are, given climate change and some of the other challenges that we're seeing, I think an extension is absolutely appropriate. I do want to also mention, take a moment to mention, we really do appreciate your support for 3011, the legislation that would give states the flexibility to use ARPA funds for transportation projects and to cover those cost increases associated with inflation. So thank you for that.
I appreciate that acknowledgement. I understand it came up earlier in the hearing, and we're still trying to get it done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Padilla, thank you, and Senator Kelly's rejoined us. Senator Kelly, thank you not only for rejoining us, but also, again, for inviting the Mayor Romero to come and testify.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mayor Romero, another issue that I regularly raise on this committee is the challenge of PFAS contamination. We spoke about it yesterday in my office, and most of the PFAS contamination in Arizona is in our groundwater, in aquifers. And that poses a special challenge in our state, and especially in Tucson, because groundwater is our backup supply. That's after the Colorado River. So Mayor Romero, can you briefly explain where Tucson gets its water from and how important a backup supply of water is given the cutbacks on the Colorado River?
Thank you, Senator, for your leadership in really putting PFAS on the map, especially in this bipartisan infrastructure law. Most of our PFAS contamination in Arizona is in our groundwater, in our aquifers. We are a sole source aquifer, which means that we get our water, our secondary supply of water, because our primary supply of water is from Central Arizona Project, which is the Colorado River water. Secondary source of water is our aquifer, and it's a closed aquifer. That means that it doesn't discharge to rivers or an ocean to clean and remediate the PFAS from the water. It's not a recycling system. And so we have to literally take our aquifer water and remediate it from PFAS. And that is what has been taking our funds, right? We're spending $1 million a year. We spent almost $50 million in remediating PFAS, and our ratepayers did not cause this issue. So with the drought the 22-year drought that we're living in Arizona, the less access to Colorado River water, the more dependent the city of Tucson becomes on our aquifer water, on our secondary source. And if it is contaminated with PFAS, that makes much less availability. Right now, we're not using 10% of our water supply because of PFAS contamination. So it's incredibly important. The work that this committee did to include PFAS remediation and access to it to cities like Tucson, Arizona, because it really is our source of being able to continue to thrive as a city.
And yesterday we were talking about how the plume in the aquifer, the PFAS plume, is mobile.
Is moving.
It's moving, and we got to get ahead of it.
Yes.
And that these funds in the infrastructure bill allows us to fund that remediation effort to head it off at the pass there, to say. Yeah, we got a lot to work to do, and I want to continue to work with you, and we'll work with the EPA on this to make sure everything is in place to deal with this issue. On another issue that I raise in this committee often is finishing transportation issue, finishing Interstate I-10, actually expanding it between Phoenix and Tucson, goes down to 2 lanes for 25 miles. Every day there's an accident that causes a backup in excess of an hour. The Arizona Department of Transportation has applied for a mega projects grant, which we created in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law to widen this 25-mile stretch and better connect our 2 population centers. In our remaining time here, Mayor, from Tucson's perspective, what are the advantages of expanding I-10 and improving the flow of people, goods, services between our 2 major cities?
Thank you for your leadership on both the PFAS issues and this issue, Senator. For Tucson, it is extremely important to be able to have access to the largest city in our state. There are commuters going back and forth from Phoenix to Tucson, and the delay that it's a primary connectivity. The delay that accidents on that stretch of Interstate 10 cause the flow of goods and services between our cities, the first and second largest city in the state, is very cumbersome, especially because we share the road with semi-trucks, and that becomes another delay issue of supply chain services. And so we are looking forward to additional leadership from you in terms of the work that you've done with the possibility of Amtrak connecting commuters from Phoenix to Tucson, because that way we can remove single passenger cars from I-10 so that we could see that goods and services flow better. So thank you so much, Senator.
Yeah, Tucson's the 33rd biggest city in the country. Phoenix, I think, 4th or 5th. Fifth biggest, and we've got to resolve these problems. And it's not only 25 miles of 2 lanes, but there's also no feeder or access road. So when there is an accident, you have hundreds of cars often that are just stuck there for hours. And there are, major manufacturers of renewable energy, technology, even electric cars, and this potentially could, shut down their production line. So it's good for Arizona, it's good for individuals, and it's good for companies, and safety as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. We've been joined by Senator Sullivan from Alaska. Senator, how are you doing?
Thank you, Mr.
Welcome.
Chairman. I'm
Good to see
doing
you.
great.
You're recognized.
Madam Ranking Member, good to see you as well. Mr. Tymon, I want to talk to you about an issue I think is important. In your testimony, you discussed AASHTO's core policy principles, including the increase in flexibility, reduction of program burdens, and improvements of project delivery. I think we all would agree on the importance of that. My question relates to the assignment of NEPA authorities to states, which is a really important program, certainly important for Alaska, and supports your core principles. The FHWA has been inserting language into the MOUs between states that would allow them to withdraw NEPA authorities from states upon a, quote, civil rights allegation. Now, there's no statutory authority whatsoever. I'm going to meet with the nominee to be the next director of the FHWA. He had a hearing here last week. I'm going to meet with him this afternoon and talk about this. Or, more broadly, if they determine that a project doesn't fit, quote, environmental justice goals. Okay? These are really broad mandates, again, not statutory at all, not to minimize the seriousness of civil rights violations. I've been making a strong argument that the Biden administration actually proactively discriminates against Alaska Native people, indigenous people in my state, but that's a whole nother topic. But this certainly, from my perspective, looks for provides potential for abuse of discretion by the federal government when the whole purpose of what we're trying to do here is provide more flexibility to the states and to be able to get a more streamlined permitting process that is state-focused. It's my understanding from reviewing comments from FHWA that they've already strong-armed Florida and Utah into accepting this language into MOUs. Can you comment on the potential impact of this MOU language change on transportation projects, delays it might cause, and really abuse of discretion? Look, we don't want civil rights violations. We're all against that. But to try to insert it into NEPA authorities for states, to me, is a real broad abuse of discretion, and I would be very interested in your views.
Well, thank you, Senator. First, let me say that this program in particular, I have a specific interest in. I spent 12 years on the House Transportation Committee, part of that working for Chairman Don Young.
I know.
Where this program...
We miss them every day.
Yes. This program originated really from language in the House, back, I believe, starting with Safety Lou, actually,
yeah.
First iteration of this. We've heard from many of the NEPA assignment states about their concerns with the changes in the agreement that FHWA is pushing for.
And by the way, you think FHWA has any, you know the statute, you think they have any statutory authority to do this?
Well, I think...
I don't, but I'm curious about your...
Well, I think they're trying to fix a problem that doesn't exist. We've had extensive conversations with the administration. They say that they don't see anything that's happened so far that would raise concern for them, but they want to put this in here
anyways
from for belts and suspenders standpoint. So,
wow.
I don't think this is a problem that exists that they need to fix.
Yeah.
They have been pushing hard. You mentioned several states that did accept the language. Their agreements were expiring. They had the choice of really accepting the language or essentially not having the agreement.
I know for a fact my state is very concerned about this. We have a strong record on all of these issues, but it just seems to be a broad overreach, and also it's going to do what I think every panelist in this hearing is against, which is delay the implementation of infrastructure in our states. Would you agree with that? Certainly has the potential to do that.
Sure, I would say that...
Just remember, the language is an accusation of civil rights violation. I mean, anyone can make an accusation.
Right, and when you talk to FHWA, they say they aren't going to utilize this in a way to delay projects. But I will say that states that are utilizing this this program have built up an infrastructure to be able to take on these responsibilities and the delegation of that authority. And in those states, actually, FHWA has kind of reduced their presence. So to have to reverse this trend for states that have had this agreement, it would be a really tough transition to go back to the way things were before those states enter this program.
Okay, thank you. Any other witnesses have a view on this? It's a very narrow topic, but it's a pretty important one. I know my state's quite concerned about it. Anyone else?
If I may, there's also a significant issue of sovereign immunity and giving that up.
Oh, that's a
with
good
this,
point.
with this. So that's that's a big part of this as well.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think it's an important issue that we need to look at hard, particularly as we're getting ready to vote on the confirmation of the new FHWA administrator.
Good. I'm glad to hear that you're going to be meeting with him this afternoon.
Yep.
We're very much interested in moving that along, and I know you share that too.
Thank
All
you.
right, Senator Capito, and then if we have nobody else, I'll wrap it up. I have a couple more questions. One of the questions I've already telegraphed, and it's advice you would all would have for Secretary Buttigieg. And my other question is going to be, so you'll just know it's going to be, is there a question you wish you'd been asked that have not been asked? So, all right, Senator Capito.
Well, thank you all. And I want to kind of end the question on, it's related to the bumblebee, but we had the Director Williams from Fish and Wildlife came to West Virginia, spent a whole day with us. We spent some time with Secretary Riston. We spent some time with our DEP and then with some of our stakeholders. And I appreciate her visit very much. But it became very apparent that we got a communications problem here, and that's at this point it was Fish and Wildlife. But what really struck me in terms of the one federal decision provisions that have been in effect for a while, we simply codified them in this last bill because we know that'll save time and money and hopefully have these concurrent reviews. But, you know, it was almost like, well, Fish and Wildlife has this review, and then, well, we got Corps of Engineers over here, and then we got Federal Highway Administrator here, and then we have West Virginia DOT here, and then we have West Virginia Environmental Protection here, and it just seemed like it was a ping-ponging of responsibility. And a lack of communication and not getting to the approvals that you need to get these things moving forward. So, Secretary Riston, one federal decision, Mr. Tymon talked about it a little bit. Is it actually in effect in your mind? Because now we're talking about if a permitting bill comes up, one of the bases of this permitting bill, we think, might be that one federal decision would be extended to energy projects, grid projects, and all of these other things. We're the test case here in transportation. Is it working? Is it a reality? And what are the problems? Or what are the good things about it?
Well, the good things, it's obvious. It is the framework for the FHWA to be the single point and to be the clearinghouse, if you will. As a Secretary of Transportation, when I assign someone a project, the first thing I do is put somebody in charge, somebody I can hold accountable. And that's what we have to do with this process, is put somebody in charge. You ask if this is working? Absolutely not. It's largely been ignored. We have had discussions at meetings that the acting director was at. There doesn't seem to be a sense of urgency to enact this or to even discuss it very much. The key to this provision in the law is going to be to act quickly and get it in place and address these processes. We have to rebuild trust between the states and these federal agencies. And you're right, the communication is awful. It's a recipe for failure. We have to address these communication issues. And if we can't do that, then we're going to have a predictable result. We're not going to like it, but we're going to have a predictable result. But no, it's absolutely not working. If we are going to wait 2 years into the program to do something that we need on the front end of everything we're doing, how does that make any sense whatsoever? Once again, there's a federal inconsistency there. We've got to do better. We've got to close those communication gaps.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the purpose of the hearing really today, is for us to say, you know, these provisions of, you know, as you said in your opening statement, which I thought was very, very impactful, when you say, you know, we've got a chance here. I mean, you've been around a while. We've got a chance here that you've never seen. And because we have the money. It's not just the time, it's the money. And we also have the will of Congress and of the president to move forward on these things. And I know our governor certainly is very, very active. He wants to build, or he wants to fix and maintain. And I know you got a lot of pressure that way. But if we don't, if we wait to the back end, well, we're going to end up wasting money, number one, because we're going to end up approving things that maybe wouldn't have gotten approved if they'd had the full vetting, because you know how it is. You start to run out of money, so you get a little bit panicky, and you go, okay, we'll do that, and then you find out 2 years later, that wasn't a good idea. And that's how you get, 1.5 miles of Route 35 built, and it stays like that for 25 years until you completed it, thank you very much, just this last year. So I'm very concerned about this because we want to move these projects. We don't want to skirt any of the environmental laws, absolutely. We don't want to endanger a species, but we want to have common sense. So I think communication is, I was impressed to hear that the Secretary of Transportation in Delaware doesn't have the same problem. So maybe this goes to that, that inconsistencies that we've heard about in the hearing. One state can work very well, one state not so well, and then you get inconsistent opinions, and you don't want to go one way if you're not sure in 6 months you're going to get pulled back. For instance, you had the right to be flexible with your funding. You got the funding flex that you wanted in West Virginia, and then you get a letter 3 months later saying, you shouldn't be doing that. That makes no sense, and you wonder, is the right hand talking to the left hand? So my thing is, I think this one federal decision is the best way to go. But it has to be implemented, and it has to be, and we I think are responsible for the oversight to make sure this is happening. So hopefully, if we get somebody in place at Federal Highways, that will, because when you don't have anybody in charge, as you said, when you don't have anybody in charge that's really accountable, it makes it more difficult to hold them accountable. So thank you all very much. I'm going to have to run, but I did appreciate everything, and I want to thank my West Virginians for coming across the mountain. Appreciate it. Thank you. On those beautiful roads.
Senator Capito, thanks so much for suggesting we have this hearing. This has, I think, been illuminating, and so I just want to say to our friends from West Virginia what a joy it is working with your senator here, both of your senators, actually, so thank you for that. I mentioned earlier that I was going to ask you, well, if you had any advice for Secretary Buttigieg. I mentioned earlier that I was going to ask you if there's a question maybe you wish had been asked or haven't been asked. And before I do that, I want to go back just to a little bit, if I could, to our earlier discussion on the proposed greenhouse gas performance measure. I tell you, Mayor, what you shared with us is what you and the folks from not just your city, but your state, but really from throughout that part of our country, what you're going through in terms of drought and temperatures is just unbelievable. Unbelievable. And I'm a big music fan, and every now and then I quote a guy named Stephen Stills, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, Buffalo Springfield. Stephen Stills, who once wrote a song that starts off with these words, something's happening here, just what it is ain't exactly clear. Well, in this case, it's very clear what's going on. It's going on not just in Southwest, it's not just going on in our part of the world, but it's going on all over the world. And it's important that while we address the symptoms of those problems, we also address the root causes of those problems. And some of the ways to do that are actually embodied in the legislation that the President signed a year ago, or in Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the legislation that he just signed just last month, which provides a lot of ways to combat climate change and actually grow a lot of jobs. So with that, I think we ought to note that the Federal Highway Administration has the authority, I understand, to issue the rule that we've been talking about here, I think since 2012. And the rule was previously issued, and then I'm told it was rescinded. So they've had the authority, issue the rule, rescinded the rule. It's clear that we got to address transportation emissions, which are, as you know, the largest source of emissions, carbon emissions, and greenhouse gas emissions. I think it's like 25–30% of our greenhouse gas emissions are from the cars, trucks, vans we drive. Maybe another 25% comes from our the generation of electricity number, maybe 20% or so from our cement plants, steel mills, and so forth. But it's clear that we got to address transportation emissions. And I hope that the infrastructure bill that we passed and enacted and funded and is now being implemented will help our states reduce emissions. And I believe the rule gives the states the certainty they need, and we want to make sure that there's a follow-up with respect to the flexibility that you need. Now, for advice for Secretary Buttigieg, I still call him Mayor Pete, and actually I call him Secretary Pete. And he says, no, you can call me Mayor Pete. So I'm not sure what to call him, but we find he's pretty good to communicate with, pretty communicative and responsive and so forth. And I think it comes from being a mayor, and that's always helpful. But I'd just like to ask each of you, and Mr. Tymon, we'll just start with you if you'd like. If you could give Mayor Pete / Secretary Pete maybe one piece of advice that you might have for him and his administrators and who are charged with standing up the new transportation programs of our bipartisan infrastructure law. If you have one piece of advice, what might that be?
Well, first, I would say that the Secretary, I think, has been a tremendous ambassador for the administration in this area. I think he's been extremely well received and respected within the industry for the work that he's done here over the last year and a half. I would say my recommendation to him and to the folks that work with him is to continue to respect the fact that the transportation needs in each state are very different, and providing them the flexibility to be able to address those needs in the way that best suits that particular state is an extremely important part of this bill and of these programs. It's really been the foundation on which the federal transportation programs have been built over the last 50, 60 years. It served it extremely well during that time period, and I think it will continue to serve it well in the future.
All right, good. Thank you, Secretary Riston. If you could give Secretary Buttigieg one piece of advice with respect to actually implementing this law, standing up, and what might that advice be?
I think my advice to the Secretary would be to surround yourself with the very best people that you can get. If you walk into a room and you're the smartest person in that room, you're in the wrong room. And that's what I would say to them.
I've never walked into a room where I was the smartest person anywhere. My wife, I always said these folks on our staffs and my colleagues have heard me say too often, I surround myself, in terms of why I've had some successful in my life, I've always surrounded myself with people smarter than me. My wife says, it's not hard to find them. So, all right, Mayor, same question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would say once a mayor, always a mayor, so you could go ahead and call Mayor Pete. Mayor Pete, I'm really happy that he's the head of our Department of Transportation for our nation. As a fellow mayor, he understands the intricacies and the needs of the cities. As mayors, we have to provide the services and balance our budgets and run our city smoothly to provide a quality of life for our residents. And so what I would say is that the direct funding to cities is extremely important because cities, a little bit different than state agencies, we have the capacity and we have the plans to institute the climate resiliency and climate adaptation strategies that will help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So, for example, the city of Tucson, we have our climate and action and adaptation plan. We want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to zero by 2030. And so direct funding to our cities with a federal funding is going to be super important, because just as we received the $25 million from RAISE for our bridge, we also received $12 million to purchase zero to no emission electric buses for our transit fleet. And so we have a plan. We know how to get it done. We would appreciate the Department of Transportation to be able to work directly with the cities so that we can layer funding to be able to deliver the goals that both the city of Tucson and the Biden administration and Congress have in this bipartisan infrastructure law.
All right, thank you. Secretary Majeski, maybe a piece of advice for Mayor Pete, if you will.
Sure. I would say this is a historic time. We are going to invest more in infrastructure than ever before. State DOTs are going to be delivering the largest capital programs than we've ever done before. And so I think listening to the states, giving the states the flexibility to be able to deliver our programs, that is going to be key, and making sure that we have Federal Highway Division offices in our states that want to work with us, that are partners, that are listening to us, that are helping us kind of get to yes, as opposed to always kind of putting up roadblocks in our way. And so I do appreciate the effort and the work that AASHTO does for us, because they bring us all together and we're able to do these peer exchanges and find out what's working in their states, and we can have these open dialogues. And that's kind of where we do find that a lot of these inconsistencies end up happening. And so AASHTO provides a great platform for us to be able to kind of all come together and have a collective voice for this. So my advice would be to listen to the states.
That's good. When I was governor, I loved being part of the National Governors Association. Loved being part of the NGA, and we learned a lot, shared a lot of ideas, a lot of initiatives with one another, and worked together. And I've always found that that's a big part of what AASHTO does. And it benefits us, and I know others, every other state as well. So this is just an opportunity for us. Add any thoughts or comments you have. If you want to put in the form of a question that you were not asked, you're welcome to do that. But any closing thought, we'll start, Mr. Tymon, with you.
Against my better judgment, I'll dip my toe in the water here and just say that if you had asked where Secretary Majeski and I had gone to college, you would find out that we're both proud Blue Hens.
Fighting Blue Hen? A fighting Blue Hen?
Absolutely. And this might be the first time that this panel has had two Blue Hens testify.
This is pretty good bookends. I like this bookends right here. That's great. My wife went to Appalachian State University, and they have been punching above their weight in football. And my sister and a bunch of my cousins went to Marshall, as I think I mentioned to you, Jimmy. And after they knocked off Notre Dame the first game of the year, my sister's hard to live with. And so for the Fighting Blue Hens, we'll eventually, hopefully we'll never have to play Marshall again at Marshall or Appalachian State in Boone, North Carolina, because it's a tough thing to do. All right, Mr. Secretary.
I guess the last thing I'd like to leave the committee with would be, we've all received grants. I have recently received one, $16.2 million for a project in Wheeling for a streetscape project. Excellent project. It's going to change the facelift of Wheeling, West Virginia. It's a wonderful project. Experience tells me, though, that the agreement process after that grant's been awarded to me is very cumbersome, very difficult, takes a lot of time. The time it takes to get that agreement in place is going to be longer than it was for me to apply for that grant and the review process, get the grant awarded. And this project is under contract. It's been awarded. I have a contractor ready to go to work. I need clear guidance from the FHWA that I can go ahead and put the other pieces of the funding and start that contractor working and use this. That's not clear to me today, whether I can do that. Should I wait? Should I hold up? These are the type of things that we deal with in the discretionary arena. I would hope that the new FHWA director would pay close attention to the agreement portion of this, not only revise that process, but I would recommend elimination of it altogether. We have a process where we are awarded a project. We enter the data for that project in a record system the FHW has. It's their system, the FEMA system. What do we need an agreement for? We're done. Let's move forward. There's a process that doesn't do anything. That's my final word for today.
Good. As we've said several times here, I pushed the administration pretty hard to get us a nominee, and they've given us one. We think he's excellent. Led two states, Delaware. He's led Colorado. He's very heavily involved in Kentucky, and I think he's got great credentials. He's also somebody who's really good at communicating, and he has sat in your seat as not once but twice, both you and Secretary Majeski, and I think that's very helpful. I don't think I mentioned this earlier. I've heard a lot of been around Joe Biden for a long time, and he and I have heard each other's favorite sayings forever. One of his favorite sayings is, "All politics is personal, all diplomacy is personal," and I think Shane Labatt gets that. And I think he'll turn out to be a good communicator, a good partner as we go forward. We just need to get him confirmed. Thank you. Mayor, please.
Chairman Carper, I just want to thank you for being so generous with your time and thank this committee for their incredible work. As a mayor, brand new mayor of the city of Tucson, well, I can't say that anymore. It's been almost 3 years this November.
Does it seem longer?
I'm sorry?
Does it seem longer?
What I would like to say is that I am incredibly lucky, and mayors across this country are incredibly lucky to be able to serve during a time when the federal government is investing historic levels of funds in our communities, and that it has allowed the city of Tucson and I, as their mayor, to be able to plan and make transformative investments and change the historically disinvested neighborhoods in our areas in one generation. And so I have to thank you, appreciate the incredible work that has been done in this committee to be able to get to a point where it became a bipartisan law. And for me, I'm looking forward to continue working for the quality of life of our residents on PFAS, on infrastructure, on greenhouse gas reduction in our city, and to be able to think and dream boldly in putting plans in front of our community for a continuation of our streetcar. That's the next step for us, right? To be able to think big, think bold, and think transformative in terms of the investment that this law can put on the hands of our cities, where we can do transformative change in just one generation. So I just want to thank you all for your hard work, and the Biden administration for believing and investing in cities directly and in the infrastructure of our nation.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I should have written down the number of times people use the word transformative. Almost every witness has, and it really is transformative. And I think we're really fortunate to be in this situation. It's tough to be in the situation with climate change and global warming, the crisis we have. That's tough. But the good news is I think we have a common cause to address that. And we are, so I think, very much inclined to find ways to collaborate on the transportation side. And there's, what is Albert Einstein, my favorite, Albert Einstein. Most people remember Einstein saying that insanity, what is the definition of insanity? To do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. A lot of people have heard that quote. Not so much my favorite Einstein quote, in adversity lies opportunity. In adversity lies opportunity. We face great adversity, but there's real opportunity here. We're going to realize that opportunity by the kind of collaboration that I think we're all committed to. The last word, and then I'm going to have a little bit of a closing statement. But Secretary Majeski, wonderful to see you. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you for bringing that wonderful member of your team sitting back there in the first or second row.
No, thank you again for the opportunity to be here today and for the constant support that you and our entire delegation have given us in the investments that we're making across our state. I again would be remiss if I didn't close with talking about safety. Every presentation that I have been doing for the last almost year now, I start that presentation by showing our fatality chart. And I get that updated chart once a week. And we are constantly having to drive home the message of safety and the importance that this is not just a DOT issue, this is everyone's issue, and that we need everyone's participation and help in reducing the number of roadway fatalities and serious injury crashes that we're seeing on our roads. So we're very grateful for the additional focus that the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law has put on safety, because this is not something that's going away. It is going to be at the forefront of everything that we do, every single DOT, and so having the support for Congress provide us with the funding and the resources that we need. We're very grateful for that. So thank you, sir.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that there. We're, Senator Capito and I, and our team, our colleagues on this committee are blessed with wonderful staff members. And one of them, a woman sitting over my left shoulder, who's looking up now, has just focused again and again and again on safety and making sure that when we write legislation, big bills or even not so big bills, that we have a huge focus on safety, and it's needed, and that's part of her good handiwork. Well, let me close by again thanking all of you for joining us. It's been illuminating and I think enjoyable. It was just great to be back and I was talking with Secretary Riston. Just great. We had a family reunion back in Beckley, West Virginia last month to celebrate my 100th anniversary of my mother's birthday and my 130th anniversary of my grandmother's birthday. They're both born on the same day, August 18th. And so wonderful to ride through West Virginia and be back in Raleigh County, where one of my great-great-great-great-grandfathers was a co-founder of Raleigh County, and I got to speak at the church where there's a little boy used to go to church with my grandparents who wanted me to grow up and be a preacher. And I wanted to be a naval flight officer and ended up doing other things, but actually be back in a church that my grandfather co-founded and speak in that church was just wonderful, as you can imagine. So all those great West Virginia memories. But in closing, thanks again for not just showing up, but for sharing your perspectives with us on the implementation of this bipartisan infrastructure law. It's a great opportunity here. We don't want to blow it. And one of the best ways to ensure that we don't is to find ways to collaborate and work together. A little bit of housekeeping before we adjourn, and I would ask, I love this is one of my favorite parts of hearings, when I get to ask for unanimous consent to submit statements related to today's hearing in the record, and there's nobody here to object. So I get to say without objection, and nobody objects. That's good. And seriously, senators are going to be welcomed and invited to submit written questions to the record through the close of business on Wednesday, October 5th. Wednesday, October 5th. And we'll compile those questions. We'll send them to each of you. And we ask you to reply by Wednesday, 2 weeks, Wednesday, October 19th, please. And I think, is that it? With that, I think it's a wrap. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you. Hearing adjourned.